in a place called Tobacco Road. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Man. Right? I love that song. The Nashville Teens, about 1964, Woo. I think. Great song. Actually, not their original song. They copied it. Let's get to our guest, Scott Geheimer. Scott, what state are you in?
I'm in Indiana.
Indiana. Okay, very good.
Thanks for coming in and joining us, Scott. Pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And boy, where do you want to jump in?
Yeah.
I've got like 10,000 different questions, and I know we got a ton on the internet coming in.
Yep.
Let me just start with a really easy one. Of any 1911 you could ever have, what's the one that you don't, but that you still want?
Well, I don't have a first-day production gun.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
There were 50 of them, so I guess know there's a little bit of chance of getting one, but I've missed a couple, and so that is still a hole.
Well, a big hole.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard get. Yes, I understand that.
We Gunslinger Auctions a few years back, we had Winchester 1873 serial number 6. It's the lowest one known to exist, and it came out of absolute nowhere. So that was a big thrill.
That's not a first day gun. That's a first hour gun.
Yeah, it really is, and it went for well into the 6 figures. So it was a lot of fun to sell.
Scott,
number 3 showed up here a few years ago when I wrote an inspection on it. Ooh. When that gun was being auctioned, it came out of the woodwork.
Wow.
And wasn't very good condition. It wasn't completely original. So, I hate to say it, but number 3, I really didn't want to buy it, but, it was really nice to handle.
Yeah, sure. I can imagine. Scott, question. Since you have this such in-depth knowledge about 1911s, what inspires you to kind of engulf yourself with this particular firearm? Where does this all come from?
Well, when I was active duty Army back in the 70s, I was an Army MP. It was a duty weapon. Mm-hmm. I taught at the military police school and started collecting and, buying 45s. I probably, bought guns for, 8 or 10 years before I really realized that I was a collector.
Oh,
that seems about right.
Yeah, I just thought I was an accumulator, and I had an 01 license, and I used that license primarily to support my own hobby.
Lots do.
Smart move.
Yeah.
You must have handled some really choice firearms in the course of just your professional duties in the military. I mean, pretty much they just rebuild these things until they're rattling sideways as much as they are fore and aft, don't they?
Yes. Now, rifles, they went in regularly, for repairs. The pistols actually never went in for repair or rebuild unless they needed servicing. A lot of things were done at, unit levels, but when something went to an ordnance depot or an arsenal to be rebuilt, they went through the guns and separated all the unserviceable parts from, the parts that could be reused, and, parts were parts. They assembled pistols and they went out the door. But, I saw a lot of weapons while I was on duty, but you really don't think about that at that time.
Sure. Other professional responsibilities. I like your term accumulator, by the way. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to borrow that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I was just going to say, so how did you go from accumulator to collector to pretty much the foremost authority in? Because explain to people what you do for, and you can name names. We don't mind. What you do for others as far as 1911s.
Well, first and foremost, I am still an active collector. I don't know that, while I'm physically able, that I'll ever be able to get away from that. But I'm at the age where I don't know how many more years I'll try to maintain the collection that I've got. But, I started, it's kind of interesting. When I came off active duty in 1979, I came back home and I was an 01 dealer, and as I would do little shows here in Indiana, there was a fella I would run into him now and then, and he would see 45s on my table, and he would say, "Do you mind if I sit down and take a look at some of your guns?" And so he did, and he always had on the same blue jacket and plaid shirt and pipe in his pocket and get his little notebook out, and he would take notes. Well,
I love those guys.
I would see him, periodically, once or twice or three times a year. And then in 1991, I walk into a gun show, and there he is. He's released his book. This was Chuck Clausen, Charles W. Clausen, the author. Mm-hmm. And so we became, really good friends. We realized that we only lived about 2 hours apart.
Hey.
Then I really started becoming, I would say, serious about the collecting, because I think the Clausen book, it allowed us all to understand better what we had. And I have been pretty fortunate up to that time to have a relatively good eye, buying guns that, you may not know every single part, whether or not it is original, but you do develop a pretty good eye regarding original finish. Mm-hmm. The signs of refinish are the same regardless of what you're looking at. So, you could pick out some pretty good pistols, but it was really nice to have the information to, separate the wheat from the chaff. And, and that really defined, collecting, and it really impacted the market. When the book was first released in 1991, a military 45 was $400 or $500, and in the next 10 years, those $400 or $500 guns were $2,000 guns.
Yeah,
and certainly more expensive for the rare variations.
Yeah,
so,
well north of there now.
Oh yes.
Yeah. They, to get anything decent, they start at about 3,000 and kind of go off into infinity from there.
Yeah, I mean, they're really starting to take off, even more so than single actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think, at one time the Luger was the most collected handgun in the world, and, it's kind of seen its day, and I think a lot of the single action Army collectors, it's almost like 45 collectors now. Mm-hmm. We're aging, and as values go up, sadly, it prices a lot of guys out of the hobby.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier. I can't say that the guns have ever been inexpensive, but everything is relative. But now, they've appreciated, so quickly, just at astronomical rates. When I bought my first Singer, I paid $24,000 for it.
Wow.
And that gun today is, a $250,000, $300,000 gun.
Yep.
May all your investments pay off so handsomely.
Well, it's I've never done bad, buying a Corvette or a good gun. If you buy the right thing, it's
True that.
It's a pretty sound investment.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll have to talk about Corvettes.
I was going to say, boy,
I've got a few myself. Yeah.
You just landed right in the pool.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Yeah,
we don't want to go there.
Fair enough. So but people from all over call you to confirm that their guns are what they are. How I met you originally was we sold a Colt Ace about a year ago, and we had lots of pictures. It had a Colt letter, and it was just an absolutely beautiful gun. And the gentleman that bought it contacted you and sent you over a few pictures, and you nailed it immediately as a fake. And then I called you thinking, "Oh, come on, you can't do that from pictures." And then you convinced me within 30 seconds, and then had me take a couple of parts off, and was like, "Oh."
Just on a handful of pictures, you were able to discern.
I was like, you can't do that from pictures, and you did. So, hats off to you. We refunded the man his money. We sold it at a later auction as what it actually is, and I was just like, very impressed with that. So,
well, I think a lot of that boiled down to. I remember that gun. It was an early service model Ace, or at least you thought it was, when it was actually an Argentine.
Yeah, that was it.
And, back when the Argentines came in, they were pretty inexpensive, and some people that, shouldn't have been doing it, they faked a lot of guns. So, I had seen that before, but the profiles, the frames were made differently, the curvature in the front strap and recoil spring housing, dust cover, that was different. The amount of flat surface before and after the grips, these were things that you and I discussed. And that's how it was so easy, to see that was not, a Colt receiver. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't feel bad, one of the major auction houses a few years ago, they were trying to sell a Singer that was an Argentine. And they weren't very happy when I called it out.
But Scott, it had snuck past Colt.
Yeah.
They make the blame thing.
Yeah, our gun did have a Colt letter.
But on that one, it was a little bit easier. It was a serial number of a gun that I had actually purchased.
Oh, that would have that
familiar.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was. We always knew that there was a fake with the same serial number, but I never knew where it had landed.
Yeah.
We knew where it was, 30 years ago, but that's the first time that it actually surfaced.
Well, we tried to do some background on it. We believe that a guy that used to be in the beach cities out in Southern California did it and then sold it through a reputable auction company at the time. And the gentleman that bought it is a dear friend and a very reliable collector. So, he was taken aback for a minute, but he took it very well and said, "Man, just go ahead and resell it as what it is." And
what are you going to do? But good for him. But this is real Sherlock Holmes stuff, Scott. This is great.
Well, and over the years, I don't know. I show. I think I show one or two fake service model Aces on my website that were made out of Argentines. And there were a lot of guns. I've looked at a few Singers, that were faked out of Argentines. Mm-hmm. And just recently, in about the last year, I authenticated a Singer for a well-known dealer, and turned out it was a Remington Rand.
Ooh.
It was manufactured out of a Remington Rand. So the only thing on that gun that was original, it had original Singer grips.
Wow.
Which are pretty valuable, in and of themselves. But, it's tough if you're on the end of having owned the gun for 20 years. But, it's nice to be able to at least identify it and know what you've actually got.
Well, it is.
You asked what I do, and, first and foremost, I collect, but I've got a website, and people subscribe to that site. It's $40 a year. It's not a ton of money, but I show over 250,000 photographs of about 1,300 or 1,400 1911s now, and adding photographs.
$250,000. Yeah, that's $40 worth.
Hey, Scott, listen, we gotta take a quick 1 minute break.
Sure.
Don't hang up, okay? And we'll get to you as soon as we get back. We'll discuss. We'll discuss about your website. We'll get the address to it and everything. All right, you're listening to Gunslingers right here on
the Gunslinger Syndicated Radio Network,
and we'll be back right after this.
Yes, sir.